Dark neutral wools are some of my absolute favorite. If you've observed much of my work, you know that I like a rich chocolate brown background. I often dye those using up wools that I'm not using, throw them all into a big pot and simmering them with bunches of dye until they're nice and rich and chocolatey, and then mixing them all up and using those for my background. Now, there's other places where you need dark neutrals. I might want to use a plaid for some interest in a border background, or I need something much lighter in a field, that type of thing. So let me show you what I've got available in dark neutrals. This is one of those wools that make a very comfortable primitive background. It's been around for a really, really long time. This one has a nice hand to it. This would be a joy to hook with. I often will mix this with a lot of different things, but this is a good possibility for a background. This wool, I always think of bird's nest, mainly because I had a student hook a bird's nest, and she used a lot of this wool in the sticks that made up the bird's nest, along with some other wools. But any place you want some texture, the center of a sunflower, or maybe some brown leaves on the ground, that's what this could look like. Whatever you want that kind of, a lively interest going on, this wool will give that to you. This one is almost a solid. It has a nice sort of oatmeal feel to it. Anything you want to use to make this color. I've used this a lot for dirt roads. Tree trunks, if they're lighter, this would work. Basically anything you want this nice beige color. Another good possibility for a background. Okay, this wool, N061, is also great for backgrounds, but it makes good tree trunks because it's not what I call a dead brown. It has all the things that make brown brown. It's got a little bit of red, a little bit of green, a little bit of navy. It's really pretty hooked up. It is one of the looser weaves of wool, not terribly so, and it does wash up fairly tight. But I love this for backgrounds, mainly because it's a double-sided wool. So you're getting two wools for the same piece. I just let them flop up whichever way they come up. They're really not that much of a difference unless you're hooking big chunks of them. So if you're mixing it all up like spaghetti, it does a really good job of that. It makes a very versatile black. This one, a good old checkered, again, would also work, particularly if you marry it with some other wools, would work really good in a background. I've used this for fields, those fall fields when things tend to get a little dried up and you want some interest. In particular, you want some little dark sparks every now and then. This is perfect for that kind of wool. This also makes a great over dye. This one, N045, is quite unusual in that it's a very flat wool. It feels so super thin. It feels like cotton. But it does wash up fairly well. It's not terribly shreddy, which is good, but it's not super, super fluffy like the things that we really like nowadays. But you cannot beat it for this color. This is a good neutral brown. It's got a little bit of gold fleckles and a little bit of red striping going on. This makes it a wonderful candidate. I add this every chance I get to my antique background. This one is a blurry wool, which is kind of a weird way to describe it. It looks blurry just looking at it. So it's a great one for blending, particularly if you're hooking like a dirt road. You could use lines such as this for the lighter areas and this for the darker areas, and actually hook ruts in a road and then use the other strips to fill in. Again, another great candidate. I think all the neutrals light and dark are good over dye candidates. But this one also makes a nice, really primitive background because it's not a dark, saturated brown. It's kind of a lighter, washed out brown. This one has the red lines with sort of the yellowy orange lines in it. And when you hook it cut it according to the salvage, you're going to cut it this way. So some of your strips will be very plain. Others will have a little bit of this light stuff going on, and you can sort them out and use them accordingly. This is a modification of some of the wools we see a lot of. This one just happens to be a sort of a very dull, medium light texture. This would also be good for roads and things along that line, good for over dyeing. Just any place where you want this sort of a warmer, but yet neutral tone. N062, one of my favorites. It's a very intense dark, but it's not a solid. It's got all this wonderful bits and parts of color going on. I will often use this as the outer border. This is one of my darkest go-to wools. And here it is remade. So this is N052, this is N052N. You can see a slightly different tone. This one's a little bit more red. This one's definitely more neutral. It has the similar kind of flecking going on in the fibers. But both of those are fun wools to hook with. And they could be hooked interchangeably because you really can't see much of a difference. This is a wool that I like to over dye quite a bit, or cut it apart and then separate it and use the individual parts very separately. But there's a lot of things that you can do with this wool, and these kinds of plaids really aren't very common, so they're a little hard to find. Here's a good old plain old ordinary tan, N55. N57, this is another one of those that is quite a bit on the flat side. See how thin that is up in there with a fold? But it washes up fairly well. Again, it doesn't fluff up as much as our really good wools that we can get today, but it's not as bad as some of the worst wools that are very stringy when you hook them. But this one definitely needs a good healthy wash before you use it. I love the warm tones in this rug. I've used this in birds. I've used it in foliage. I've used it in lots of other places. Any place you want this tone, and it's kind of a medium. It's not super light, it's not super dark, but it's got this wonderful, warm kind of a glow to it. I always think of this one as a companion piece to this one. This is a lighter version of this. They can be used in tandem if you were to be shading something, maybe an animal or something along that line. This one's got a little bit of that herringbone going on, which makes it really easy to use. I love this little shock of bright red. I can't resist a herringbone. This one just happens to be reversible. So we've got one on one side and one on the other. I've used this by hooking a beading stitch and doing roofing. That works really, really good. So that's one way that you could handle this. This is one that is often misunderstood, but when I have a student hook it, everybody likes it, and I sell out of whatever I have with me at the time. I love this for tree trunks. It's got that little extra color in there, but remember, when things hook up, they don't look like the plaid. They kind of dull down. Most textures will end up duller than they are when they're flat. But any place you wanted to use a brown, this would be a great candidate. This is like bubbles on wool. They call this kind of patterning honeycomb. And if you over dye it, all the little white threads will pick up the color and you'll still be able to see the pattern. And it's so much fun to hook with. I'll use this for small animal eyes. This is great in a chicken. Over dye it and use it in the center of flowers. Use it for an accent just about anywhere. This is another one of those nice, soft, beigey, brown textures that are great in a background or great in like a farmer's field or something simple like that. I would also mix this with yellows for a primitive rug, okay, because this one's kind of borderline between a beige and a yellow. This is what yellow looks like in a primitive rug. This teeny tiny texture is really fun to use in a lot of different places. Depending on the rocks that you're hooking, this could be rocks. You might have to over dye sections of it to get a light, medium, and dark. Because if you took a salad and put a salad with this and made the salad be the shadow, it's not going to look right. Remember, when you're hooking something, you want the whole thing to have one texture and then to have values within that texture. So you would have to do something to this in order to make it usable with a shadow. And that could be something as simple as putting it through the marrying process. This is a dark gray and black. I always thought of it as a little bit of green, but it's definitely gray and black. It makes a really rich, dark background. This wool is very similar to the next one, N063. It's just a little bit more intense in its contrast. This would be a great gray, particularly if you wanted to marry it and knock down these light values. It would make it great overall gray. It's also a great over dye candidate. You can put just about any color over this and it's going to come out great. This wool is one of my favorites. I've nicknamed it concrete because it can be used to hook concrete. Now, concrete in my area is very light gray, almost white, and it's because of our stone that make up the concrete, which is limestone. But with this little beige line in there, it warms it up and it doesn't look nearly as cold in your hook landscape. And I think that's important. But this could also be used for roofs or over dye it because it's a great base for over dyeing too. I love this old looking wool. This is a great primitive wool. Use this to hook anything that you want the colors, hooking a little building. You've got built in light, and dark values. So all you have to do is sort out your strips. You've got everything that you need. This brown one is a nice warm brown stripe. Has just a hint of a reddish line in there that you almost can't see. And then a goldenrod and then a dark color. Cut it against the stripe or with the stripe, however you want to do it. I like to hook it with the stripe and then pick the one strip that'll do the job. So if you're hooking a tree, you could get one strip that will have light and dark and a medium color all in one strip. So if you're a wide cut hooker, you want to look for these. It'll help you get the job done. This one is a nice primitive wool. I'm going to pull ahead on the numbers. We'll do them out of order. This one's 79. They're pretty much companion because if you hook them, they're almost going to look the same unless you hook one of these in one area and this in a separate area. They would look very similar, but they also would blend very well. So if you didn't have enough of one, you could use the other to fill in, stretch it. In between, number 77, this is a fun sort of a plaid, a little bit speckly going on. I like this wherever I want texture. So it could be roofs, it could be tree trunks. Has a little bit of a blue line. Um, what else can I say about this one? It's a little bit on really the looser side. It's still what I would put in very good range. It's not excellent as far as the hand goes. It's not as good as some, but for this kind of a texture, it's very good for me. This one is unusual in that it is brown with a tiny little bird's egg little line in it. I love to surprise this into tree trunks. It's great for sunflower center. I've used this mixed with other wools for ground in a landscape. There's a lot of different things you can do with this. It would also make a good background.
Speaking of backgrounds, this is one that has been around for a while. It's got the little red line in it that'll show up intermittently. You'll definitely see it here more than you would in your hooking, but it's a nice little surprise when it shows up.
This one is my all-time favorite brown off the wall. In fact, I need to cut this bolt up. It looks, when it's hooked, it looks very similar to my antique background. The bundles that I dye that have many different wools on it. This just has that beautiful color, but yet variation, and it's very, very subtle.
This is a pretty wool with a lot of different colors. It might be a little too busy for background. Depends on how you hook your motifs. It can definitely be mixed with something maybe a little bit calmer, but I love this for a lot of different reasons. Gives a lot of interest to your hooking.
This one, another black and white speckly. Remember that one that had that little bit of blue in it? It must be the same sort of weave. It's just that this one is black and white. I'll use this wool for like eyes in small animals in a primitive rug. Anywhere you want a little bit of a fleckle or a texture. This also takes an over dye extremely well. For you primitive rug hookers out here, I really like this wool. It's got a very unusual color, sort of like a taupe. Does it have a slight green cast? Perhaps. But strong black lines in soft areas of lighter. There's a lot of different ways you can use this wool. One of the more usable wools out there is the simple check. I've used this for backgrounds, for borders, for a lot of different things. It gives you interest. It's not flat like a flat brown would be, but yet it's very dark and very rich. This gray is unusual in that it has a lot of little colors in it, particularly these yellowy lines. But it's got other colors as well when you see it up close. Um, Much more life than what a flat gray would be. So this will give you a lot more mileage. So even if you're hooking something like Ohio State's colors, which is, the gray and the red, I would use a gray like this because it would be more interesting. It's an incredibly dark black, and it's got a little bit, there we go, a little bit of texture. And quite frankly, you cannot see those kinds of colors when you're looking at it. But when you look really, really close, yeah, you can see those colors. But it is beautiful as a background, particularly as that first line of background around the motifs. And then you fill in with something that's maybe not quite as black. N063 is a great textured wool, a little bit, I can never decide if this is green or if it's orange. It seems to depend on what it's next to and in what light I'm looking at it. But it's a nice speckly kind of a wool, great for a background or as a dark in another combination. This one, I think the vendors call this one tin roof, and I could see someone hooking a tin roof with this. It would give you that gray, but it would put extra colors on it. and make it a little bit more interesting than if it was just plain solid gray. Thank you for watching the dark neutral video. If you want to see the other colors of wool, just check out this video right here, and that will show you everything you need. Just click through those and watch them. To order any of these wools, you simply go to my website at cindygayrughooking.com. Then on that page, there is an inventory sheet. Now, the sad thing about neutrals and the sad thing about all textured wool is that they come and then they go. And when they're gone, they're usually gone forever. So if you've got one that you like, and I might have something that you like that maybe you bought 15 years ago and haven't been able to find, buy it, because when I am sold out, I can't get any more of it either. When they're gone, they're gone. Buy as much as you can afford to have on hand, and then move on and hope and trust that new ones are in the pipeline, and we'll see a new one tomorrow. That's it for now. Thanks, everybody. See you soon.